Hi, I'm Erin, and this is week 4 of Communications 101. The interpretation and revision of the Constitution is a great source of political conflict. This is no surprise, considering the success or failure of the country rests on how the document is handled. The Constitution is a system of checks and balances to uphold justice and the freedoms of the people. There are two common views of interpretation believed to support the Constitution in accomplishing this: originalism and the living document view. These two views may appear to be in conflict, but in reality they work together to keep the United States functioning as its forefathers intended. First, in deciding how to interpret the Constitution, it is important to understand the original purpose of the Constitution. The Constitution replaced the Articles of Confederation in 1787. The Articles of Confederation, referred to as a Firm League of Friendships, gave the government very little power over the states because the people feared setting up a government that looked too much like the tyranny of England that they had just been liberated from. This resulted in a government that did not have enough power to serve its people and was lacking in funding and authority to employ military to protect the country. The government was at the mercy of its states, which often failed to come through. Fortunately, the young nation recognized this and began writing the Constitution. The enactment of the Constitution gave the government more power to be effective, but also employed a system that had checks and balances to avoid the misuse or imbalance of power. The Constitution did not originally include a list of specific civil rights. It simply served as a blueprint for the government that would enforce laws, protect rights, and promote harmony and unity among the people. The Constitution assigned the roles and duties of the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. These branches were employed to uphold the principles of the preamble, which reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." However, some argued that the Constitution needed to more specifically address these principles, and then the Bill of Rights was written and added to the Constitution. The first 10 amendments that make up the Bill of Rights serves as the specific situations in which the principles of the Constitution apply. For example, the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech. The amendments did not serve to change the Constitution, but rather to clarify what it means for society. Since the Bill of Rights, 17 amendments have been added to ensure the freedoms of the people are carried out in situations that were not clearly understood from the principles of the Constitution alone. Because the Constitution is not an exhaustive list of laws, but rather principles for making laws for society, there are several different ways people choose to interpret it. However, people generally fall into one of two camps to varying degrees: originalism or the living document view. Originalists believe that the Constitution should be read and applied exactly as the Founding Fathers intended it to be read and applied. They also believe that the Constitution should be a fixed document that cannot be changed or applied to any law or ruling outside of what is explicitly stated in the Constitution. Changes should only be made to the nature of the Constitution after they have undergone the rigorous process for ratifying an amendment. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the living document view believes in addressing things on a case-by-case basis and evolving with the times as needed. This view suggests that a ruling can be made regarding a case without an amendment being implemented to support it more explicitly. The living document view acts in accordance with what they believe the principles of the Constitution to be. Some suggest that the same security of the fixed Constitution and the originalist view can equally be the cause of a country that is enslaved to the decisions of the past. Meanwhile, others believed that the freedom a living constitution would protect would be the same freedom that could destroy the stability of the government meant to ensure it. The truth is, in many ways, the Constitution functions as a living document. Judges make rulings on difficult cases that are not clearly spelled out in the Constitution. One historical example of a living constitution applied is found in the Brown versus Board Education case in 1954. In this case, it was ruled that state-mandated segregation was a violation of the 14th Amendment. However, Brian C. Anderson with the Manhattan Institute writes, "Neither precedent nor history, key pillars of jurisprudence, supported the view that the Constitution demanded desegregation, but the Warren Court wasn't going to let these difficulties impede it from doing justice. The court turned to contemporary social psychology that purported to show that segregation harmed the self-esteem of black school children and made it tougher for them to learn. If not for the living document approach applied in this case, the history of civil rights may have looked quite different. It is because of the living document view that the outcome of these cases, as well as many others, serve to uphold the justice and equality that the Constitution failed to make clear. Some may argue that the living document view has only succeeded because of its application of common law. Common law is made up of an understanding of the past and its traditions and precedents, as well as what people generally see as right and good. It looks at what worked and what didn't work through history and adapts the application of these ideas to the changing times as needed. However, common law is subject to change and not always for the better. That which is right and good is sometimes relative and is becoming increasingly more so in society. One example is the issue of transgender rights. A decision was made by the Supreme Court in 2018 that allowed transgender individuals to choose the public restroom they used based on their gender identity rather than their biological gender. This decision was believed by the court to be in line with the spirit of the Constitution. Most originalists would not agree and would suggest this decision should not be made without undergoing the scrutiny of the amendment process. Originalism can protect against the dangers of a common law system, like the living document system, because it would protect against a ruling being influenced by a judge's personal views or the current views of society. Originalism suggests a cut-and-dry approach that interprets the Constitution and its amendments literally. Unfortunately, this approach is not enough in a nation that is quite larger and is facing much more than the Founding Fathers could have ever imagined. The Founding Fathers were not perfect, and so neither is the Constitution. To limit the Constitution to function only based on its original intent severely handicaps the government in fulfilling the purpose the Constitution demands of it. The originalist view allows a limited amount of change to the amendment process, but with great opposition and the passing of time. For example, the 13th Amendment took over a year to be ratified in the United States, and several states did not ratify it until many years later. Mississippi was the latest, officially ratifying the amendment in 2013. At first, it seems as if these two views, the originalist view and the living document view, are unable to be reconciled. However, a closer look at the abolition of slavery shows how these two approaches to the Constitution can and do work together. Before the ratification of the 13th Amendment, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in states waging war against the Union. Lincoln issued this proclamation using his power as commander-in-chief to prepare the grounds for the changes that were about to take place in the country. Any living document decision can serve the same purpose. They serve as a trial to either confirm that the decision is in fact in line with the Constitution or whether it should be re-evaluated. But without these changes undergoing the rigorous amendment process, there would be no permanency to these changes, and people could choose to ignore them. Lincoln recognized that his Emancipation Proclamation would not stand the test of time without making it a permanent fixture of the Constitution. If the Constitution was not created with checks and balances and was only handled by people that agreed on whether it was meant to be read as a living document or only applied how the framers intended, the government of the United States would not be a government for the people and by the people. It is in the diversity and the conflict that the Constitution functions as it was intended. Both the originalist view and the living document view for interpreting the Constitution have strengths and weaknesses. The originalist view is at risk for impending progress, while the living document view alone is lacking in structure and accountability. The framers of the Constitution may not have been able to foresee all the amendments the Constitution would need to adequately serve its people, or the many conflicts that would occur around the Constitution. But they understood the diversity in government necessary to ensure the country's freedoms and planned accordingly. The framers of the Constitution would not have chosen the originalist or the living document view exclusively, because neither view alone is sufficient. These two perspectives together, whether one wins out over the other in the Supreme Court or they meet somewhere in the middle, are one of the things that makes the United States of America a country of liberty and justice for all.